many good seasons. I still think he's actually underrated.
No question.
I do. I know that sounds crazy. I think the guy is underrated for what he could do mentally and physically, locker room, and handle Sean. I just think he's so brilliant, and we can just
hell of a leader.
Yeah, continue to talk about him for years and years and years. Our next guest has been around him, which I'm jealous of. I've been around some pretty cool people, but never got to hang out with Drew Brees. But we welcome in Mike Detillier, WWL Radio TV New Orleans. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. So, Mike D, we were cutting up last week, and Derek got kind of on a tangent about how Drew Brees should have won the 2009 MVP and not Peyton Manning. How do you see that season, and should Brees have won the MVP?
Yeah, I mean, I get it, and I agree with him. He should have won it in 2009, but I thought Drew's best season was 2011. You look at the numbers this football team put up in 2011. It was staggering. They surpassed the greatest show on turf. When you look at the amount of points scored, the passing yards, total offense, they were on a roll. It ended in one of the craziest games I've ever covered, that playoff game against the 49ers on the coast. And Alex Smith that day, Greg Williams took a lot of chances. I think he wanted to be the hero of that game. And Pierre Thomas got knocked out early in that game. High hit, and he got knocked out. The Saints came back, and the lead changed 4 times from 6 minutes into the game to the end of the game. If you just were watching the watch, it was a great watch. It didn't end good for the Saints, but I thought the 2011 season for Drew was the best season I ever saw him play. To be honest, I thought that year he should have been the MVP. You didn't win a championship that year. He was as good as you could see throwing the football that year. I thought that was the best season I ever saw him play.
Did the scandal kick in the next year or the next? I don't remember when it all.
Yeah, it kicked in the following year, and things were never quite the same.
Right.
I don't think Sean was quite the same coach, and this team had some after effects. And the defense got a little old, and they went through a transition defensively, while the Saints were still a really good offensive team. Their defense wasn't nearly as good as we saw in 2009, 10, 11. And you could see 2013, I thought, was the kind of the last of that run of that team that they had pieced together. And then we saw a lot of changes on the defensive side, the football, coordinator-wise, player-wise. You just got old. Sean insisted on toys offensively, and they didn't do a good job retooling the defense. And then the 2017 draft hit, in which they got Lattimore, bang, you hit with Ramczyk, Marcus Williams, Kamara, Trey Hendrickson. It was it brought him back with a shot a couple times after that because of that influx of young talent.
Mike Detillier, NFL Insider on ESPN 105.9 The Zone, brought to you by Eye Care Professionals, talking Saints and Drew Brees. Mike, with Drew, you think about it, it's weird in this area, it's crazy to say that he's underrated, but even though the Saints started landing Monday Night Football and big Sunday afternoon windows for the first time on a consistent basis, just because of the market kind of, I think maybe his stature and size or whatever, I do think he's a little underappreciated and underrated even after this career. Now, it'll continue on. It'll build. People will look back. How do you see it, Mike D?
Yeah, I would agree with you. Also, too, the era in which he played in, where you had Brady winning championship after championship. And Manning had already sort of solidified himself as one of the all-time greats. And so you were kind of caught there. He wasn't the 6'5" quarterback, okay, like Peyton and Tom Brady was. And I would just joke with him and still do today. He was the best tippy-toe passer I've ever seen. And you watch a lot of his throws, he's up on his toes to throw it. That's because he wanted to see downfield better. A lot of guys try that and don't get away with it. He got away with it. He was magnificent accuracy, but it was to watch him in practice. And if he threw 24 footballs, you might see one on the turf. I mean, that part for me always sticks in my mind. That when you watched him throw, even in practice, he was so accurate, and you rarely saw an off throw with him. Every once in a while you would, but he was dead on accurate. And then after practice, everybody's running in, to go to the locker room, change, whatever. Drew would stay on the field and work with the young receivers. Seeing him work with Michael Thomas, seeing him work with Jimmy Graham, with Brandon Cooks, that was Drew. It was never enough for him. He felt like I need to get a little bit more work in. And he would sort of handpick guys that he felt had a similar work ethic to him, that wanted to work after practice. Okay? He was a guy who really didn't need it, but what made him who he was the fact that he wanted to do that. He would simulate a game plan on Saturday by himself, walk that field up and down, simulate calling plays and where he was going to throw the ball. How many guys do that? I mean, that was just his work ethic. That was his way of preparing for a game mentally. Had nothing to do with physical. It was all about the mental part of the game, and he felt that gave him an advantage. And I think if you believe it, it'll work for you. If you really believe it, it works for you. And so I think Drew always felt that way, that he needed to put in that little extra work. He knew what he wanted to do downfield. He knew what could work very, very well. He was just brilliant in that capacity. And I've told him this recently. I hope I live long enough to see a guy as good as you, but I'm not real sure in a Saints uniform.
Man,
he cured a lot of ills. He cured a lot of ills that were on this team, and he made it work. And it was so funny last night. We got Louisiana line camp here. It's the biggest line camp in the country. And it's finishing up this morning. Pete Jenkins is running it, 83 years old, running the line camp. And he was telling me this about Jaden Daniels from LSU last year. And he was like, I really think 5, 6, 7 years from now, LSU fans will appreciate Jaden a lot more than they do today. Not that they don't, but he said you appreciate something when you don't have him anymore. And he said one time, defensively we weren't real good last year. So he says, they on the field, and he said in 3 plays they scored a touchdown. Jaden walks off the field, and he said, Jaden is so humble about everything. And he said, I just grabbed him. I told him, I said, Jaden, you just unbelievable talent. But he said, I just got one complaint with you. You score too damn fast. Now I got to put my defense back out on the field. And he said, you know what? I could say the same thing about Drew Brees. There were certain times that he would score and score so fast, and then all of a sudden, hey, defense, you got to get back out on the field. It was 3-4 play drive. get back out there. And he said, I think people at LSU will appreciate Jaden Daniels a lot more down the road than they do today. But he said, I never forget me telling him, man, people calling into the show and texting about Drew's shot, he can't play anymore. We need another quarterback. And my thing is, you're not going to appreciate him until he's not here. Now those same people are calling, complaining about the quarterback you got now, and they're looking for somebody else and somebody else. It's part of the nature of the beast of playing that position. Yes, you get too much credit when you win, and yes, you get too much blame when you lose. But when you're a special talent like Drew Brees, you don't see that often. Okay? How many great quarterbacks have come in since Dan Marino left Miami?
None.
Okay? Green Bay's been lucky and smart to go through that deal when you have Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, and now potentially you got another one in Jordan Love. But think about going through that like a Miami has done. They still trying to replace Eli Manning with the Giants.
True.
You look at the Broncos, aren't they still trying to replace Peyton Manning since he retired? It's not that easy. Those guys are not standing on the side of the road with their hands up in the air. And so what we saw last year from C.J. Stroud, and we had a discussion with some of the NFL coaches Saturday at the Louisiana Line Camp about this, and most of them said, I'd never seen what C.J. Stroud did last year from a rookie quarterback. It's unprecedented. And how quickly can he build on what he did last year? But those guys are few and far between. And I hope I do see a guy as good as Drew in a Saints uniform.
Me
again.
too.
But you know what? My clock is ticking.
Well, Mike Detillier, WWL Radio TV New Orleans. He joins us on the Out of Bounds show. You're listening to ESPN 105.9 The Zone. The show is brought to you by your next Nissan Pathfinder at Cannon Nissan in Jackson. Mike D, I want to switch gears with you. Jerry West passed away last week, 86 years old, legendary player, West Virginia Lakers executive. You know the drill. You met a lot of amazing people. I mean, look, y'all had pro basketball down there, and then it left and went to Utah, and we've talked to Pistol Pete about Pistol Pete with you. And then, of course, y'all got pro basketball back, and I've been to a few dozen games down there, and I just love going live. But I know you remember watching Jerry West growing up, and you know what he did as an executive. With all the functions and different things that you've gone to, have you ever had a chance to meet him, Mike D?
Yeah, he was a great guy, very intense, you could tell. But he loved to talk basketball. He loved to talk sports. He was intrigued on what you knew. He wanted to know what you knew about someone. And so, but, I told him about growing up, watching him play. And I think, in my time frame, the only guy that had a bigger effect on the NBA game was Michael Jordan. Mike kind of changed everything in so many ways, and he got people watching basketball. I think Larry Bird and Magic in the 80s revitalized the game, and then Jordan took it to another level. And people watched him. You might have watched him to cheer for him. You might have watched him not to cheer for him. But he revolutionized the game and brought it to a marketing standpoint like no one had ever done. But I think Jerry's in the two spot. As a player, he was an unbelievable player, super competitive. He was on some terrific Laker teams, but the Celtics had better teams back then. And finally won that championship in a great team in 72 with the Lakers. But his executive skills, you think about the championships he pieced together. He had a great eye for talent. Mike doesn't have that. Jordan doesn't have that eye for talent like Jerry West did. from a standpoint of being an executive, and also to being he's the logo guy. How many guys, when you think about it, they the logo guy for that league. With the NFL, it's the Shield. With NBA, it's Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was a very intense individual away from the game, very nice. But I think he sort of felt comfortable hearing you talk about things that maybe you saw, people you met, that maybe he didn't have to. So the Saints are practicing at the Greenbrier in West Virginia. And Bobby and I, we watching the practice, and Bobby's like, man, I wonder who has that house up on the hill. It looks like an old mansion back in England. Kind of built on a deal. So the governor of West Virginia passed, and we talking to him. Said, who lives at that house right there? He says, he said, some guy said y'all probably never heard of him, Jerry West. And he bust out laughing. It was Governor Justice, and he was like, yeah, Jerry West's house right there. And so you think about West Virginia, two guys come to mind real quickly in sports, and that's Nick Saban, who's from West Virginia, and Jerry West. But he was a great guy, very, very intelligent. He understood this game. But very few superstars have a real eye for talent, young talent, like Jerry West did. It's rare, Bo, because I've been around a lot of them that super talented as players, but could not relate to a younger generation that Jerry West could. He was fabulous doing that. And look, all the championships he pieced together, and for different teams. I mean, it just wasn't one team. It was different teams. And he was a consultant for so many, executives in this league. And so I think in my lifetime, other than Michael Jordan, Jerry West was the second most influential basketball player, executive, if you want to combine that's been in the NBA. I think Mike did it as a player and also the marketing standpoint, like no one had before. But Jerry, he was the other part of it as a player and also as an executive.
Just unbelievable. It drove him mad how much he wanted to win. He was a crazy man, but brilliant. I guess you see that a lot in business too.
Yeah, everybody's wired a little differently. And you bring that up, and it's so funny because when we had Coach Jenkins on last night, he was the right-hand man for Nick Saban. Nick called him the Wolf. When I needed something fixed, on my defense, I'd call Pete Jenkins. And Pete coached and helped coach with Alabama for a long period of time, not only at LSU but also at Alabama. And he was, Nick needed something during the season, he'd call Pete. And yet he also worked for Andy Reid. He worked for Andy in Philly. He's been a consultant with Andy with the Chiefs. And he was talking about how different the personalities are between the two of them. He said, just totally different personalities. He said, now the end game was the same. It was all about winning. But he said, they did it a different way. And he was like, Nick drove you to the point to the brink. He pushed to the limit. And that was no joking around or anything else around Nick. He was strictly business. He said, with Andy, it was different. He was very focused, very smart, and he was driven also. But how much time he'd spend with his grandkids and kids, and he had friends, and they, watching TV or talking, and he said, they were totally different personalities. And, he used that old term about there's more than one way to skin a cat. And he said, to look at the success of Andy Reid and look at Nick and his ability to sort of lead. And, Pete actually coached a while with Bear Bryant. And he said, he was another personality. And he coached with Parcells, and he was another personality. It does go to show you, I think, a little bit that you know people do it a little bit different way, and that their success there. But everybody's a little different in life, and it's what works for you. You can't be phony. That's the one thing today. I think with young players, man, they can pick out a phony real quickly. You can only be who you are in sports. And Nick had his personality, and Coach Kelly and at LSU's got his personality. Lane's got his at Ole Miss, and Andy Reid's got his at Kansas City. Everybody's got a different personality on how to make things work. But I think the ability to change during the years, you got to be able to build upon that. And I think that's the biggest part of success. I don't care if you're in business. I don't care if you're in sports, is you have to have the ability to change. Some people, they just want things the way it is, and they don't want to change one bit. And I think the most successful people in life are the people that have that ability to keep the core values they have, but also the ability to change when life changes. And that's what we see today.
We'll leave it there. That was fantastic. Mike Detillier on Drew Brees and Jerry West, WWL Radio TV New Orleans. He joined us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Thanks, Mike D. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Bo. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Lunch today brought to you by Martin's in Livingston, and that blackened redfish sandwich that I had last week, or a fried catfish po' boy. Maybe hammer some of those nachos. You want to grab some nachos for lunch? Cold beer?
I want to listen to Mike D tell more stories.
I know. It was like that 23 minutes wasn't enough. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. The Out of Bounds Show, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. Good morning. Welcome in. We're driven by your next toolbox for your pickup truck. From Rick's Pro Truck in Gluckstadt, Rick's Pro Truck in Flowood, RPT Commercial. Driven by your next tool.